one time. Perfect. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully people will be able to jump in as we're going, but just to kind of kick things off, my name is Amanda Miller. I am the Executive Director of the South King Tool Library. There's some of my contact information on the screen. If you didn't have it, now you do. We are really excited to be able to offer this class for you today, and at least able to share with you some of the great tools that we have available. Carrie Thornton is going to be our teacher, but I will be here helping technically and to maybe field some of the questions and help things facilitate as well. I also will send a recording of this session out afterwards. So if you'd like to speak up during the session, just know we are recording. You're welcome to turn your cameras off or mute, but it's always nice, and I speak as a teacher of some of these things and as a participant of lots of classes, when they can actually see your face and get some confirmation that you heard or understand what teachers are saying. So please feel free to engage. Promise we probably will not make a ton of money off of your image, but just so you know, we're going to record this and share it with the community. And well, let me go back. If you haven't heard of the Tool Library before, I'm really glad you joined us too, because we offer a lot of different classes. We offer access to tools for free, barrierless access, so you can come in and check these things out. A lot of food preservation stuff. I know it's addictive. I know it's something that people grow very passionate about. So you might want to invest in these, but definitely try before you buy, because there is a lot of learning curve that goes into it, and Carrie can go over that. We also try to keep things in mind as we purchase tools, so hopefully we have some good quality stuff. I wanted to invite everybody to come down to the Tool Library and check us out on the 23rd of July. We have a lovely lady from King County Noxious Weeds. Sky is going to work with us. This is our rain garden last year. This year it's way blown up, overpowered by daisies, but we're excited to have King County Noxious Weed come out and work with us on another workshop in the garden. So you're welcome to come by. And then the obligatory commercial here, thank you to the Department of Ecology and the EPA Region 10 HRSC grants for allowing us to provide this resource to you guys. We are really grateful that we can offer barrierless access and keep trying to remove barriers as we go. But with that, I will just stop talking and get to the important stuff. Carrie, were you ready to share? Let's see.
Yeah, I sure can. Did you want to do a couple polls before we got started?
Oh yeah, let's do the intro poll. So no pressure, but if you can, I'm going to put just a couple questions up here. I'm going to launch it. Boop. There we go. So we were just doing a poll that says, asking you a few questions as you're participating. If you can't enter into the poll because you're on a mobile device or it's too confusing, you're welcome to unmute or enter into the chat your answers, so I'll read the questions for you. The first one is, have you done food preservation before? And the options are yes, a little, or yes, a lot, yes, a little, or no, nothing at all. The second question is, what kind of food preservation have you done before? And we probably all have done some kind of food preservation, whether intentionally or not. But dehydrating, water bath canning, pressure canning, pickling, freeze drying, freezing, stock, broth making, or other. I, Carrie will be very proud, just ventured into the realm of kombucha and vinegar making for the first time, because that was a little more than I could commit to before. I'm pretty proud of myself. And then the last question was, what kind of food preservation are you interested in learning about tonight, or in general in life, right? Kind of the same list there with dehydrating, water bath canning, pressure canning, pickling, freeze drying, freezing, stock, broth making, or something else. Oh, and I did ask how you heard about the class today, if you can let us know. So great. I'll give it just another minute here. think. Yay, somebody else made vinegar and kombucha this year. It's exciting. All right. I think probably have everybody captured that we're going to get. Can I go ahead and end the poll? Is that okay, everybody? So not go on your permanent record, don't worry. Cool. Awesome. So I'm going to share the results here. And it looks like, can you see them too, Carrie?
I can. I think because I'm co-host, I could see what you see.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it looks like most people have tried a little bit or a lot of food preservation, so that's awesome. Most people have done freezing, numero uno. Water bath canning, definitely not a lot of freeze drying, that is understandable, and not a lot of other, and not a lot of pressure canning either. So that could be a big question. And then definitely interest learning about freeze drying. Stock and broth making would be an interest to dehydrating water bath. So yeah, great. I think I have to print the screen to be able to get these, and I can't remember, but I'm just going to try this real quick. And then we'll be done. Okay. All right. Oh, cool. Now, did you have any other questions you wanted to throw out there, Carrie, before we get started?
I'm ready to get started. I also just want to let folks know, like we've got a good amount of time together, and I have for the first part of the class, I have some slides. I'm gonna do a bit of a slideshow and just do some like kind of overarching food preservation concepts, and then kind of go, I have a slide for like kind of different methods. And while I have this, my screen share up, sometimes it's hard for me to read chat, but you're welcome to ask questions as we go along, either with your voice, if you feel comfortable, or in the chat. If something pops up in the chat, Amanda, if it's something that like I can answer at that time, if you want to just like pop in with your voice, I'm happy to answer that. Or well, also at the end of the slideshow, I'll go through some of the resources too. And then once my slides come down, I'll be able to answer more questions. And then I think we'll take a quick break, and then Amanda is going to go and show you some of the tools that are available to use from the tool library. And I think there's a lot of fun stuff that's available. So that's exciting. And then I'm going to do a water bath. We'll go a little after that. We'll do like a deep dive into water bath canning, and then talk a little bit about pressure canning too. So lots of things. I am going to share my screen. Oh, and I guess maybe I didn't do an introduction, but my name is Carrie. My pronouns are she, her. I work with Tilth Alliance, which is an educational nonprofit. The work that I do is teaching a lot about organic gardening, composting, permaculture. I like to talk about plants for food and medicine. I like to also do cooking and food waste prevention and food preservation. So all of those questions are within my wheelhouse. And yeah.
And we did have some questions that were brought over from Facebook too. So you guys that posted questions,
that's right. Yeah. And maybe I think they'll probably be those answered as we go along. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably would be answered in your presentation, and then we can always come back to them too. So cool. But yeah, if you guys have anything, please feel free to put it in the chat. So awesome.
All right. So it sounds like I'm sharing my screen here. It sounds like many folks in the group here have some. You can do it. All right. All right, can y'all see? Excellent. All right. So it sounds like many folks that are here today have some experience in doing food preservation. And I normally like to start with kind of a general, like tone setting about what food preservation is for me. I think we as humans who prepare food and cook food, some of us grow food, we are trying to, with food preservation, take a fresh food, like in this image, an orange, and we're trying to keep it usable for as long as possible. And sometimes we're fighting against, or sometimes maybe encouraging in the case of fermentation, kind of this breaking down of food that happens. And that breaking down of food can be caused by oxidation. It can be caused by enzymatic action that's in the food. But a lot of that breaking down or like rotting of food is caused by microbes. It's caused by bacteria, it's caused by molds, yeast, those types of things. So microbes or microorganisms, I like to think about like what are the things that microbes need to live, because when we're doing food preservation, those things become our control factors, if that makes any sense. So the things that, important things for microbes to live are, obviously they need food. We want the food, they want the food. And sometimes we are trying to keep them from eating the food. Sometimes, again, with fermentation, we're encouraging them to eat the food because they're changing that food into a different food. Acidity is a huge, I think, control factor for us in food preservation. It's going to show up with canning. Acidity really is the biggest difference between water bath canning and pressure canning, and why you might use either one of those. Acidity shows up in things like pickling, in making vinegar, because some microbes can live within acidic conditions and some really can't. And for us, luckily, a lot of the pathogenic bacteria that exist in our food system, like E. coli, Listeria, botulinum bacteria, those tend to really not be able to live in acidic conditions. And so acidity can be a really helpful control factor for us when we talk about food preservation and trying to keep our food usable for longer. Time, again, microbes, bacterial grow over time. So if you're doing something, if you want to keep something for a very short amount of time, you can keep it on the counter for a little bit longer. Sometimes we'll put things in the refrigerator. If you are, doing a fermentation project, your fermented pickles are going to taste different on day 2 than they're going to taste on day 7 or 17. And that time is a really big factor, and it's something for us to think about. Temperature also, I think they kind of go hand in hand. As temperatures change, bacterial growth will fluctuate too. So different kinds of microorganisms prefer different temperature ranges. We tend to use extreme temperatures for our food preservation control factors. If you think about even just like bringing home your groceries and you put things in the refrigerator, that's keeping something cool. Refrigeration under 40 degrees, that is food preservation. Putting it in the freezer below 32 degrees, that's even longer food preservation, right? Sometimes we go to the other extreme. So high heat will kill off bacteria. And that could be, what we're doing with canning, food processing in that way. We're really using high heat to kill off a lot of microorganisms. Oxygen is another important control factor for me. For instance, there are organisms that need oxygen to live. Humans are aerobic, we need oxygen to live. And then there are organisms, and many microorganisms also are aerobic and need oxygen to live. And then there are some that prefer to be in situations without oxygen, and they're called anaerobic. Lactobacillus species, which are what we use for fermentation, is anaerobic. It prefers no oxygen environments. The same with botulinum, which is a bacteria where we would be concerned about when we're talking about canning. Botulinum prefers an anaerobic environment. And so we'll talk a little bit about that specifically when we talk about canning. And then of course, moisture. Most organisms are going to need some kind of moisture, water to be able to metabolize, to live. And so a very clear example of this would be dehydration or drying. When we dry something, we pull out almost all of the moisture. And so that's really going to slow down deterioration. That's really going to slow down microbial activity and keep our dried foods longer. Also, sugar and salt to an extent sometimes can reduce water activity in foods. And so traditionally salting foods using high amounts of sugar, those are also food preservation techniques that tend to be used in conjunction with other things as well. Let's see. So how do we preserve foods? There's lots of different ways. These are just a few of the ways that I know and that I feel comfortable talking about, but refrigeration, just using the refrigerator, is actually a really recent technology, I think. But it is like just in the last few generations have almost every person in our country that lives in a home with a kitchen has access to a refrigerator. And also to an extent freezing. Most American homes have a freezer refrigerator combo. And so it's sort of taken for granted when we go to the grocery store or, we're cooking food at home that you have a refrigerator. Something's gonna, you bring your groceries home or you cook a meal, you put it in the refrigerator. And same thing with freezing. There are some pretty specific techniques that can be some tips that can be helpful for freezing to ensure higher quality of your frozen foods. And so we can go through some of that too. Dehydration or drying is a very old technology that's been around probably as long as humans have been eating food, probably discovered by accident. Fermentation also, I think, is a technology that's been around for a very long time, much longer than refrigeration, freezing, canning, those sort of newer technologies. And fermentation probably has been around as long as, fermentation has happened even before humans, probably, and again, was probably discovered by accident. Canning, again, another relatively new technology. I think it's only been around for, less than 150 years. And
is it
and
monkeys or was it monkeys or was it elephants or something that drink like fermented grapes or eat fermented grapes? Wasn't that some?
Oh, how fermentation was discovered?
Well, like even they realize that they do it in nature. Like they prefer the ones that are already in a form of decay. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. My partner has a story about watching the birds eat the choke cherries, the ones that are fermented, and seeing them kind of definitely react to that.
Stumbling birds. That sounds
stumbling birds. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Canning is something that there are two kind of main ways that we do canning. One is in boiling water, what we call water bath canning, and then one is with pressure. And we're going to use a pressure canner to do that. So we'll talk a little more about that later. And then also, again, adding sugar, salt, acid, smoke, those different like kind of ingredients or processes that can help to preserve foods longer as well. And refined sugar, a little bit newer technology, but salt has been around for a very long time. Pickling with, using acidity for like pickling and those types of things. Smoke drying has been around for a really long time. So a lot of these technologies are things that humans have done for a very, very long time. And they show up in our traditional food cultures as, flavors that remind us of that culture, like pickles that remind us of our grandmother, or smoked fish or dried fish, or I don't know why I keep saying fish, but those are the things that I remember from my grandmother. But anyways, so sometimes these can represent, like, as we're preserving foods, we're also doing some kind of alteration. We're cooking it, or we're pickling it, or we're smoking it, and those, that transition, or that you know, the process that we're doing to preserve the food actually turns it into a different product that can be even more delicious, which can be really exciting. Some of the ingredients that we use in food preservation techniques that serve like kind of key roles are definitely acidity or acids, and those acids can be vinegar. The acid could be lemon juice or other kind of citrus, or it could be a powdered citric acid that we, you know, kind of buy specifically to just change the acidity. Vinegar, lemon juice, those will have flavors associated with them. Citric acid tends to be used in canning a lot because it doesn't have a specific flavor and it's shelf stable. So salt is often used for flavor as well. Some of like if you're making pickles, one of the things that it does is the salt will balance the acidity but in flavor, but also will be drawing some moisture out of the vegetables you're pickling, and so it helps to keep them crispy. Salt also can be its own preservation technique too. How it works is it pulls water out of things, and so like salted meat or fish that's been packed in salt, or salt cured olives, you know, they're literally pulling enough of the moisture out of that food so that bacteria can't really grow in it. Sugar does a similar thing where it can tie up water activity, but sugar also is used for flavoring in things like jams and syrups. Sugar also helps to like keep the colors bright, and keep like the quality of the food too, I think. And even in freezing, sometimes people will pack their berries in sugar because it can help to, you know, hold some of the color and hold some of the flavor. The trade-off is we have a lot of sugar in our food system already, and sometimes we're trying to keep the amount of sugar that we eat lower. So comes with, you know, some pros and cons. And then also herbs and spices, they bring flavor. A lot of herbs and spices also have some kinds of antibacterial properties, and so have historically been also useful in either helping to preserve the foods, or as we eat the foods, help us digest some of those foods. And so herbs and spices may, you know, sometimes it seems like they're just in there for flavor, but I think traditionally they probably were put in there also with a little bit of food preservation in mind. I'm going to go through my just techniques, and each one has a slide. And I always start with refrigeration because we forget that this is, you know, we use refrigeration as a food preservation technique every single day, very often. And so we sort of take it for granted, but it is really helpful in controlling the growth of pathogenic and spoilage microbes, especially for things like that can be very perishable, like dairy products, meat products, raw meats, that sort of cooked food. There's at the bottom of this image, like, you know, a casserole dish. It's like, oh, you wouldn't, in our modern kind of food culture, we would never cook a casserole and then just leave it on the counter overnight and then eat off of it for the next 3 or 4 days. We always will put it into the refrigerator, right? That's just like what in our modern culture, that's like good food safety, is just like put it in the refrigerator. Keep your refrigerator below 40 degrees. I would recommend using you can buy a really inexpensive refrigerator thermometer so that you can control, and you can keep an eye on the temperature in your fridge. It should always set, you don't want it to freeze things. So you don't want to go below 32, but definitely below 40 degrees is going to be ideal for your refrigerator. And then I think one of the questions that came up in the Facebook was about, let me see, I remember somebody asked, I'd love to learn about how to keep produce fresh longer at home. And so one of my answers to that question is I don't know if City or Federal Way has a program, but I know City of Seattle has a program, and also King County has these like food waste prevention programs. And so they have websites that have a lot of resources for food waste prevention. And this link, I'm fairly certain I put this in the resources, and if I didn't, I will add it to it. But the is if you click to it, it goes to basically a food waste prevention guide that's about like how to store foods, which foods are best stored on the counter, which foods are best stored in the fridge, and then like what part of the fridge, because there are like high humidity areas and low humidity areas. And so those can be, I wonder if I click to this, what is it bringing me to? Oh, I think I'll have to download it. Oh yeah, so this is the Too Good to Waste is the website for King County's food waste prevention. There's a bunch of resources here. They've got like flexible recipes and then smart storage. So, right, if you were to click here, there's a food storage guide and it comes in 6 languages. So that's helpful to know. And we can take a look at that. Looks like I've downloaded it quite a few times. Haha. And here's even like a picture of the refrigerator, where things would go, some other food storage tips. Let's see. And then like for fruits and vegetables, I don't know. Anyway, so there's some information there that can be helpful. You can look at that and where are we?
Too, there's a lot, you know, we worry about cleaning our vegetables and stuff. There are a lot of devices and things that are available to people, but one of the big things that I've taken to is like reusing some of the sturdy plastic containers that you have to buy things in, and trying to use paper towels sparingly, but I do, because so much of the deterioration of vegetables, at least for me, is like that moisture that's sitting and it just doesn't have anywhere to go. So what's it going to do? So putting in those little baking soda things that absorb some of that, or I don't know. I'm sure there's other tips that are probably better, but that's just definitely one that I thought of when I saw that question too. So
yeah, I think as far as fruits and vegetables go, I think each fruit, fresh fruit or vegetable has its own like ideal. I've learned recently that cucumbers do not like to be like in the refrigerator, and they actually, I've noticed that they deteriorate quicker if I put them in the refrigerator than if I just keep them on the counter. And cucumbers are something that you know, we eat a lot in our house. So I'm just like, we'll eat them up quick. And knowing that some things can last longer, like I know a zucchini can last longer and a cucumber can last not as long. So just kind of making some of those priorities too.
And tomatoes too. It's not recommended to even put tomatoes into the refrigerator, which I didn't know until I was an adult.
Yeah. So that is a resource for you. It looks like Amanda dropped that into the chat, so you're welcome to, let's see, how do I get back to my, anyways, okay. How do I get back to my full screen?
Is there that menu at the bottom?
Could be. What would it say?
All the way on the right hand side. It's like presenter. No, that's end show. Don't do that.
See all slides?
No, that probably won't do it either.
Nope, we're fine. Okay, we'll just you'll get to see my tabs while we do this.
Yeah.
So freezing again. So oftentimes, like we bring food home from the grocery store, it may already be frozen, so we're just packing it into the freezer. But if you're using freezing as a food preservation method for fresh foods that you like are growing in your garden or buying at the farmer's market or going to U-Pick, there are a few like tips that will help to keep your food to make it more usable. This image, for example, down at the bottom here is a tray with like rhubarb sliced into bite-sized pieces that is being frozen flat on the tray. I would say in addition to this image, I also would put maybe a piece of parchment paper, wax paper, or plastic wrap or something on top of that tray before you lay them out so that they won't stick. If it's a wet product, it might freeze stuck to the tray. But I do this a lot with berries. I do it a lot with like if you're freezing like green beans, you can do it in bite-sized pieces, and they call this like individual quick frozen. So basically, if you had like a bunch of strawberries and you just put them in a yogurt container and shove them in the freezer, they probably would all stick to each other. But if you freeze them flat like this, and individually, then once they're frozen, you pack them into that hard-sided container or yogurt container, or Ziploc bag, or vacuum seal bag or whatever, then you'll be able to take them out individually instead of having them all frozen together. And it's such a simple trick, but if you don't do this, it can be really frustrating to use your frozen foods. Another trick is that sometimes vegetables may need blanching. And what that means is you're boiling them in water just for a few minutes. And the reason for doing that is you're stopping the enzymatic process that's going to continue to deteriorate your food. And even though in the freezer, it's going to happen much slowly, once you kill those enzymes, it's going to keep the quality of your frozen food much longer. Besides like fresh fruits and vegetables, freezing is also useful for like meats and fish. It's also useful for like baked goods and even like pre-made meals. You can put together like 4 or 5 lasagnas. You can put together 4 or 5 like pies, put them into the freezer, and then kind of pull them out as you need them. Or even like freezing an individual, like if you made like, if you have just a family of 1 or 2, you could make a lot of little like mini lasagnas that you just like pop into the microwave or pop into the toaster oven or something like that. And you're preserving food sort of, but you're also really preserving your time. Instead of spending all that time making just 1 lasagna, you could spend all that time making, many, and then keep them in the fridge. How do you know whether to blanch? It's a good question. And my answer is always going to be the National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is this website right here, is the university. It's hosted by the University of Georgia Extension. And it is like my go-to place for all like food preservation questions, or especially around those specific things like how long do I blanch a thing? Do I need to blanch it? They have like charts for freezing and for drying, both situations where they might recommend blanching vegetables before you freeze or before you dry. And it will tell you like, should you, if yes, how long? Mostly it's for vegetables. Let's see.
I put the link into the chat there. I just have to type them out. But another question came up with, what are some examples of veggies you'd want to blanch? So if you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like leafy greens seems like a very obvious one where like if you trying to figure out how to pack like a bunch of collard greens into the freezer or a bunch of spinach into the freezer, the first thing you want to do is like cook them down. So you could cook them, like saute them all in a pan. Or you could, for things like collard greens, you could just have a boiling water and you kind of dip and blanch the kind of leaves, put them in and pull them out. So you're
that's probably really
blanching
good too for removing all of those little sand pockets and stuff. I think of like kale and all of those guys get all kinds of little.
Yeah, it's like the extra wash.
Right.
Wash them first too, but you get like an extra bonus wash out of it. Yeah, for sure. So definitely leafy greens is a one where like you immediately, oh yeah, that of course that makes sense. But even like green beans, I usually blanch green beans before I freeze them. Like if you're going to be doing like summer squash, if you're grating it, like it's hard to do that. But if you're just like cutting squash into like slices or bite-sized chunks that you might use later for soups or casseroles, they'll last a lot longer if you blanch those pieces really quickly first. Same with broccoli and cauliflower, those types of things. My go-to for freezing is to like cut into bite-sized pieces, blanch really quickly, cool them off, dry them as much as seems possible, like a dish towel or something, and then do this individual quick frozen, and then pack them into either a Ziploc bag or a hard-sided container.
Well, with that in mind too, Carrie, is there anything that you definitely shouldn't blanch?
I find that things like fruits, I mean, they're so soft that they'll just kind of fall apart. anything that's gonna, you know, cook. Definitely, like, for the real answer, go check out the charts that
Right.
are at the website.
Well, I was
But if you
thinking
can
of,
imagine like blanching like raspberries, like that doesn't really make sense. It will just kind of fall apart. Yeah.
well, spinach came to mind because I was like, well, leafy greens, except spinach, because spinach would just be like, nothing left. But maybe if it's mature spinach, but
I think,
I
yeah, for spinach in my mind, it's like I like to cook it down so that it can pack, like I freeze it in a like without air.
yeah.
So you, I don't know if I don't know if you can see my hand motions, but like
yeah, I get it.
you want it to soften so that you can pack it without air.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
When freezing, does removing air help with the length of storage time? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So as much as you can, and I think that's what I was trying to do with my hands with the spinach was like, yeah, if you can pack it so that there's no air there. So like grated zucchini, cooked spinach, those are things that I think of where you're, or like, if you've got like a winter squash or pumpkin and you cook the whole thing and then you freeze the puree, you're going to want to, do it in containers where you can pull out as much air as possible. With this individual quick frozen, it's a little bit harder to do, but I know that if you're interested in trying out, like if you want to do some long-term storage and you're interested in trying out like a vacuum sealer, I know Tool Library has that available too. So you can try that out if you want it. Dehydration and drying. I think that there's all different ways that you can do this. It's less common here in our area because we have a naturally kind of humid climate and a short summer season, but in a lot of places people build solar dryers. You can try doing that. There are also like different qualities of electric dehydrators that you can purchase. Sometimes people like to do drying in their oven. I find that oven drying, I've never lived in a house where I had the ability to turn the heat low enough on my oven to really make that work. And I feel like also using the oven for that purpose probably uses a lot more electricity than using like an electronic, like a food dryer that is kind of meant for that purpose. So if you want to, Tool Library has really nice dehydrators. You can try out, see if it's worth your investment, and see if, or just like put them on reserve when like if your family likes to eat like dried watermelon or dried strawberries or dried apples, when that season the apples are coming in, you're like, all right, I've got the dryer on reserve for that. I think that the food dehydrators that have like up here at the top of, this is a Excalibur, I think is the image from Excalibur website, is a pretty nice Excalibur, I think is like,
it's really similar to ours. Like,
yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
how many trays ours has, but yeah, it's really similar. And it's about the circulation, right? Like convection, not all houses have convection ovens, and some, that airflow is really important.
Yeah.
I think.
I think this, let's see. Boop, boop, boop. I'm gonna,
Like, where are we going?
what's that?
Where are we going? I see your mouse.
Oh yeah, no, I'm trying to do, I'm gonna stop my screen share really quick again, because I wanted to hop out of this. Sorry. I don't understand how this escape. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for my technological. Okay, now I'm here. This is where I wanted to be. Nope. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay. It was distracting me to see all those other things. So up here, the one thing I want to say is like what I'd like about this this style of dehydrator is that it has a temperature gauge. It has convection, which pushes the air around, as Amanda said, and also it has a timer on it, which I think can be really nice. Not like essential, but I for a long time had the sort of the round was like a Ron Popeil food dehydrator, which I think is like the most inexpensive. I got it for $5 at the Goodwill, but because it didn't have the convection, it was really hard to do things like I make a lot of fruit roll-ups. So when it's apple season and there's apples everywhere, I make a lot of applesauce, and then applesauce becomes fruit roll-ups in the dehydrator. And it's impossible to do it without that convection happening because all of the moisture just stays in that. So I think that this style with the convection and the adjustable heat is really nice. If you're going to do like a lot of food preservation, if you're going to do a lot of food drying, the key tips for me are cutting the foods thin, like 1/4 of an inch, because you don't want the outside to dry before the inside can dry. And then also vegetables, their vegetables may need blanching. That's really just going to, again, help them keep their quality longer. And then if you're doing meat, meat has a whole bunch of other like food safety issues that come with it, especially if you're doing game meats, or I don't even know why I said especially, because our meats that come from the grocery store still have food pathogens associated with them. And so there's a link here in the resources that I sent you for a brochure about how to make beef jerky safely. And basically you just need to at some point have a high temperature like kill step, which is either going to be like pre-cooking the meat, or after you make your jerky, like throwing it into an oven, or there's something called a hot vinegar dip where you're putting it into sort of like dipping it like as a marinade into vinegar, so that acidity kind of helps to kill some of that bacteria. If your oven has convection option, can you use that for dehydrating? It's a good question to answer Lisa's question. I don't have a lot of experience with using the oven for. If you are able to, like, if you can set your oven to go down to like 150 degrees, that would be ideal. And then the convection would help with that for sure. The convection is for like pulling the moisture out of whatever the system is. Sometimes people will just like prop their oven door open, and that can help too. I haven't done a lot of like oven drying because it just energy wise feels expensive, and it's like I want to do my drying in the summertime when it's too hot to have an oven going on and like that happening. I don't know why, for some reason it feels hotter.
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense, because it seems like it should be drying, right? Like we could ideally be drying it in nature. And like you said earlier, with the like energy savings, is it cost effective to do that? If it has the setting on it, you still have to know how long it's going to take, and if you don't know, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, people do it. There's tons of people that do oven drying. And I think if you have like a gas stove with a pilot light, that might be a helpful way to do it. I'm not quite sure, but you definitely want to have some kind of like thermometer in there so you know what your temperature is, and keep an eye on like making sure it dries fast enough, because you don't want the food to just be sitting there like for days without being dried, and it will break down and it will start going bad. And that leads us to fermentation, which is leaving things on the counter and letting the bacteria or yeast eat it. But this is in a controlled way. And so I like have a whole class just about fermentation because I love to talk about it a lot. But the crux of fermentation is that we are taking a food, a vegetable, with a pickle, with like pickled ferments, like pickle, sauerkraut, kimchi. It would be a vegetable. Sometimes it's dairy product. Sometimes it's a fruit. and we are creating the conditions for specific bacteria, molds, yeast to eat that food and transform it into something else. So beer, wine, cider, that's where you're taking, grape juice or apple juice or, like a syrup that's made from malted barley, and we're putting yeast into it. The yeast is eating the sugars from that juice and turning it into alcohol. And that fermentation very often will not just be a way of preserving foods, but also adding value, because usually that transformation, comes with added nutritional benefits, comes with very specific flavor profile that have been associated with cultures all over the globe. And so when you think about cheese, and cheese is like, first and foremost, a way to hold on to milk, which is very perishable, but you add, you put it through this transformation, and there's fresh cheeses, which are delightful, but then you get into aged cheeses, which have so many different nuance of like flavor, and there's, kinds of cheeses that are all different kinds in all different ways, and that what makes a difference between a Roquefort and a cheddar is really the microbial ecosystem that's transforming that milk into cheese. So there's a lot that goes into it. And really it's sort of like gardening, I think, for me, which you're trying to figure out who are the microbes that you're trying to grow, and then creating conditions for those microbes to be really successful. And again, those conditions are going to be similar to our food that the very first slide, which is like, we're setting up the right temperature, we're setting up the, is it a salty environment? Is it not salty environment? Is it exposed to oxygen? Is it not exposed to oxygen? Those are the kinds of different control factors that we'll be using when we do fermentation. I'm happy to answer questions about fermentation as well. Water bath canning. There's two styles of canning. Water bath canning is a simpler method. It's used for acidic or acidified foods. So that's going to be a lot of fruit and fruit products, acidified tomatoes, and then vegetables that are being pickled, or other food products where we're adding like a vinegar or a lot of lemon or lime juice to make that food product acidic, like relish, chutney, pickles, chow, that sort of thing. With water bath canning, we're really just using boiling water. And so we need a vessel to hold the water. Usually we call it a canner. It's important to have a rack at the bottom so the jars aren't touching the bottom of the pot. We need a lid to cover it. And the pot needs to be big enough to be able to fit your jars and have some space above, because they need to be able to have room for the rack, have room for the jars, and then an inch above the jars, and then room for the water to be boiling up above that. So an appropriate size. There are different sizes of canners that you can use. And I've also just used a stock pot before. The jars that we use are a two-piece, or a Mason style jar with a two-piece lid. And I will for sure when we do the deep dive, I'll show you my jars, I'll show you my lids, I'll show you my canner and all that stuff. There is also pressure canning. Pressure canning is a little bit more equipment. You need to have specifically a pressure canner, not just like a pressure cooker, but it needs to be a pressure canner with a dial or a rocker gauge, something that can tell you accurately what is the pressure inside the device. And pressure canning is required for canning low acid foods. So low acid foods are going to be things like vegetables, beans, meat, fish, soups, stocks, those types of things. Any vegetables that are not being canned, you're going to need to use a pressure canner to make it safe. So we can go into that a
All
little
right.
more later. The
Guys,
difference between,
I'm noticing that if you get, I'm sorry, I'm noticing that people, if you get kicked out and you need to come back in, I just, yeah, don't feel, you know, bad about it or anything, but I'm noticing it's happening. So if it keeps happening to you guys, just message me or put it into the chat. So sorry.
so the difference between the water bath canning and the pressure canning really is botulism. And so I think botulism is one of the things that is the fear that puts people off of canning the most. And so I can tell you what I know about it, and hopefully that will alleviate some of the fear. But that botulism is caused by a bacteria called Clostridium botulinum, and it's what produces the toxin botulinum, which is what causes botulism, the disease. And so Clostridium botulinum, this bacterium lives in our environment. It exists. It's in the soil. It comes from the soil. It exists in the Pacific Northwest. And you know, if you were to have a carrot, there might be some, but it lit, you know, some botulinum on it. But in most of the time, it's in a dormant state. It's in the spore state, so it's going to be relatively harmless. You can eat a carrot. It's not going to be a big deal. Whatever. When it becomes an issue is when that spore gets put into ideal conditions for growth. That spore will sort of like not hatch or like germinate, but it will grow into the next part of its life cycle where it can metabolize, and it will become a vegetative cell. And so when we put those spores into ideal conditions for growth, and it becomes a vegetative cell, that's when it starts to create this toxin that's part of its metabolic process. It's sort of a byproduct of the botulinum bacteria living. So it's key for us to know what are those ideal conditions for growth, because that's the thing that we're trying to control and we don't want to happen. So botulinum likes it needs to live in an anaerobic environment, which means no oxygen. So if you can imagine what we're doing with canning, we're cutting off the oxygen. Oh, okay, that's ideal conditions for growth. It wants to be low acid. So that is, when we talk about acidity, we're looking at a pH scale. 4.6 is the dividing line for canning. When we say low acid in canning, we mean below 4.6. Sorry. Oh, I see. The botulinum wants to live above 4.6. So the pH scale, lower numbers are more acidic, higher numbers are less acidic. The botulinum needs to be in a low acid environment, which is above 4.6. We could talk more about that specifically, but the canning recipes that I'm going to show you are written so that with this 4.6 in mind. So if it is a recipe that's meant for water bath canning, it's going to be below 4.6. If it's a recipe written for pressure canning, it can be above 4.6. Temperatures, also ideal conditions for growth for botulinum, temperatures above 40 degrees. So that means on the counter, shelf stable, right? Which is what we also are doing with canning. Botulinum is not going to grow in your refrigerator as long as your refrigerator is at below 40 degrees. And then water activity of above 0.85. And really what that means is it a food that's liquidy? Like botulinum is not going to grow on a cracker. Botulinum is not going to grow, you know, in beef jerky, but it will definitely grow in like canned collard greens, canned potatoes, which we're seeing in this picture. So here are control factors. When we're canning, we're cutting off the oxygen. We can't change that. We want to store at room temperature, so we're not changing this. The food that we're preserving is in liquid, so we're not changing this. This acidity is the key thing for us when we're canning to control the botulinum from becoming a vegetative cell. So the reason that so what we're doing with the water bath canning is that we're only water bath canning foods that are acidic like this. What we're doing with pressure canning is we're actually heating the food product all the way up to 250 degrees and holding at that temperature long enough that the spore actually is killed in high heat. The spore is not going to be killed in boiling water because boiling water can only get to 212 degrees and it can't get any higher than that. So the pressure canner does is it's using steam to build up pressure, and that's what can get those jars to be higher in temperature up to 250 degrees, which is the only thing that can kill the spore. So with boiling water, we're managing the spore with acidity, and with pressure canning, we're getting up to such a high heat that we're killing the spores. Okay, so that was a lot of talking to do. Okay, that was a lot of talking to do. Are y'all still with me? And do you have any questions about that?
I saw what tripped you up because I did the same thing. I was like, what? That doesn't, the ideal conditions for it surviving and living are what you have here. So,
right. So these are the conditions that will grow the bacteria. And so these are the conditions that we're kind of looking out for.
So for different situations, when you're looking at, fermentation, that you're not anaerobic. There's oxygen flow usually. And then, certain other things, when you freeze it, you'll be below. So I'm just thinking of all the different properties, like different applications, why that works. Because I did not know steam, it makes sense that steam is a higher temperature, and that's why the pressure canning is necessary.
Yeah, there's some like chemistry or physics or something to it where like when you contain, like as you contain that steam and it's building up pressure, it can get the temperature higher in that vessel. So you're at high pressure at 10 or 11 or maybe even 15 pounds of pressure to get the temperature to come up.
So what about in freeze drying then? Is it because you're taking it below and then above? Okay.
Yeah, so freeze drying, what you're doing is bringing the temperature down, but then you're also through that process removing any water content.
Right, yeah.
So it can be just like just regular drying, it can be stored at room temperature because there's no water left in it.
Everybody's still with us.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So what, how, you can't taste botulism, right? So how would you know that you have a problem if you didn't do something right?
Yeah, it's a good question. And they're saying like if the jar, the lid pops, or like, I think old timey, like if you saw a canned good that was bulging or something, that might give you a hint. It's not always the case. And so really the way that we know is just that we make sure that we follow the recipe correctly. And that's how we know.
The recipes that you find online, I understand, are not always the best ones to use. I don't know. I guess I did some pears last year, and when I opened one of the jars, it had a little bit of black on the top of it, and I was like, I don't know if that's just something or if it's mold or what. But then I'm like, did all of them end up that way? I don't know. Right.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it could. I mean, discoloration happens as well, but also there shouldn't, if you've followed the process correctly, there shouldn't, and the jar is actually sealed, there shouldn't be any mold. But you're bringing me to, what's that?
It's sterilized. You cannot reuse the internal, I think that's something that I had to kind of break a habit that I was taught by my grandparents, but the seals of things have to be clean as well as, so I think, just, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but people reusing the center parts of the can of,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I think still the when you're doing the processing, it should be basically killing off whatever is in there. That's part of the process. The key to like this thing is that when you do boiling water process, you're killing pretty much everything else off except for the botulinum spore. But you should be killing all of the like spoilage bacteria. You should be killing, that's at 212 degrees, should be killing off mold spores. It should be killing off spoilage bacteria, yeasts, even like lactobacillus, those types of things should be killed off with the boiling water temperatures. It's just botulinum that's not killed off. And so if you are getting mold, either it's because your thing isn't sealed or you didn't take the process all the way through. And so that's going to bring me to my next slide, which is how to find a good recipe. So this is my how to find a good recipe in order of safety. The National Center for Home Food Preservation is all of the recipes that are on their website for canning are literally tested in a lab. So they put the jar and they have all the probes in, so they know that when they say this specific food process, this specific food product in this size jar, processed at 15 minutes in boiling water or processed at 85 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure, is going, the center of that food product is going to reach this temperature and it's going to hold for this long. Like it's, all of that, it's based on science is for these. So this is a great place to go. Recipes from Ball, and then also Presto and Pectin, which are pectin companies. Ball is like the Ball Blue Book. They also sold jars and canning equipment. Because canning is their business, those are also generally regarded as safe. This image here is a non-example because this is a Ball Blue Book from like probably the 1960s. And you don't want to use an old version of a canning book. You want to use a modern version. So like anything after the mid 90s is what I would consider modern version, because they have changed some recommendations, and also I mean, as modern a version, like they continue to change recommendations, and so as modern a version as you can get is ideal. But you know that there was a bunch of stuff that information got changed in the mid 90s. Like if you have a canning book from like the 1970s, it probably won't tell you that you have to acidify your tomatoes, and you should, because there was a family that got botulism from eating home canned tomatoes in the 1970s. And so they changed some recommendations, and that's based on the fact that like a lot of our modern tomato varieties tend to be sweeter, because as consumers, we like sweeter tomatoes, and those tomatoes are less acidic. And so less, so then we just need to acidify them if we want to can them. So those are kinds of the things that change in our food system that we don't really think about it, but like tomato varieties are sweeter than they used to be.
And so in Jen's case, having that mold is indicative of probably not a complete process. And it would definitely, it could also have that botulinum, right?
Yeah, if there's anything that seems fishy about your jar, like just unfortunately, I would say don't eat it. The cooperative extension, like the food safety people will say, like, if in doubt, throw it out. That's a really hard thing to say to somebody if they just put up like 50 jars of, like marinara sauce, and you're like, oh, did you follow a recipe that's meant for canning? Because if you put a bunch of onions in there and didn't acidify it, that feels dangerous to me. That's a hard thing to say to somebody. The thing about the pear, like without being able to see what it looked like, there is some discoloration sometimes that can happen, and that's just like could be oxidation. If you cut a pear and you leave it out, it will turn brown. And so sometimes with things like pears or apples, we use a little bit of acidity, but also, it could be a number of things that happen, and without seeing it, I don't know how to troubleshoot that.
So I was trying, I was just trying to do it without a ton of sugar, because I made a batch with a bunch of sugar with my mother-in-law, and then I was trying some different recipes online that had fruit juice and that kind of thing. And so I was like, I don't know what's going on. So it could have been that, but. Yeah,
I mean, I think too that sugar definitely helps keep the quality of canned fruit, but it's not I don't know that it would be considered a safety issue. So like the sugar isn't going to change the pH of your food product. One thing it sometimes, again, like I know with white peaches have different recommendations than yellow peaches, because they're much, much sweeter. So if you're canning white peaches, it's recommended to add lemon juice to that. Same thing with figs. There are some fruits that tend to be like borderline with their pH. And so usually you would see that there's recommended to add lemon juice. With European pears, I think normally they're acidic enough. With Asian pears, usually they're not. It doesn't seem like that would make a difference, but like when you eat a fruit and it tastes sour versus when you eat a fruit and it doesn't taste sour, that's, for me, helps me kind of make that determination. So like I'm eating something like a melon, it doesn't taste sour to me. Like, oh, if I wanted to can that, I better look for a recipe because I know it doesn't feel acidic enough to be canned in a water bath canner, if that makes any sense. I don't know why you would can melon, but so, I mean, luckily, those are a lot of like questions to be asking yourself, but luckily there is a lot of good information online, especially if you go to National Center for Home Food Preservation, which is this UGA website. Also, if you're just looking, I don't know if it was you, Jen, or somebody else that said that online recipes are not necessarily good. And I think it just depends on what you mean by online. And I think if you're going to like a random person's blog, you don't know what their food science experience is. And so it's hard to, sometimes I'll like check the comment scroll because there are a lot of master food preservers out there that'll like, they'll be like, oh, no, you shouldn't be canning chocolate sauce. Like that's not a real thing. Don't do that. But also if you're looking for something specific, you can add cooperative extension to the end of your Google search. Like I want to can pears, low sugar pears, and then like add cooperative extension to the end of your online search, because cooperative extension is whatever information they're giving to people has to be science-based. So, you know, it's going to be a safe recipe. And all of that is like, it's all derived from this testing that the USDA or the National Center for Home Food Preservation does. So anyways, that's helpful. There are, you know, people that blogs that I trust, Marissa McClellan, who writes Food in Jars. She's written like 6 or 7 books about canning. She's a lot of modern recipes, and she knows how, like she understands the science behind how botulinum works and like how acidic or acidified foods need to be. And so I trust recipes that are on her website. Same with Northwest Edible, which is, I don't think that she's still updating this website, but there's a lot of information on there. And I think she's a scientist maybe even, but she's pretty hip to understanding that food science too. And so knowing like what's going to be safe and what's not going to be safe. So those are 2 blogs. From my understanding of what I've seen on their website, I feel pretty comfortable with them. And okay, I think that's all. I'm going to stop my share, hop out of there. It's 6:40 already. For some reason, I didn't think I was going to talk that long, but it turns out I did. I'm going to screen share again because I want to just, show a couple of things in the handout, maybe. I wonder if it is interesting. The handout basically is the outline. It's like all the words from the slideshow are there. And then, oh, there's another thing I wanted to show you. So the handout that I gave you, it should, Amanda should have sent it to your email, and it has, mine is in a Word doc, but you should have got it as a PDF. So these are all the things from that we saw in the slideshow, but I did actually, if you're interested in like building your pantry, there's just some extra questions here to like, if you want to go on this food preservation journey and you want to build up your pantry, here's just kind of some thoughtful questions about how you might go about doing that, thinking about what your family eats, what kind of food products might be useful, like what are your access to resources, like are you growing food and that's why you want to learn how to preserve all the tomatoes you're growing, or will you be buying tomatoes in bulk from farmers? Or, you know, is it cost effective to buy your tomatoes at the grocery store so that you can home can them? Probably not. But if you're growing a bunch of tomatoes, then it may be more cost effective. So there's just some questions there if you're interested in, and then some resources that, so here's a couple of resources for doing fermentation if you're interested. Wild Fermentation by Sandor Katz is a great primer for all kinds of fermentation. And then here's the links to OSU has a preservation hotline. This link is for the article when they announced that it was open season, but it was last year. So I'm not, you can still try to call the hotline or email them, and if you're interested in getting like specific questions answered. Sometimes people are looking for a hotline. Our Washington state, that we don't have as much food preservation resources for our county extension as some other places, but I think here's another resource that I want to put in here. If you are going to do, if you do want to like put up a bunch of peaches or put up a bunch of tomatoes, and you're looking to buy from farm stand or buy from like U-Pick or purchase local produce to be doing this food preservation, you can. Eat Local First is a awesome website that is put together by Tilth Alliance and some a coalition of other folks that are really, the point is to find an easy way to connect consumers with local food. So whether you're looking for a farm or farmers market or a CSA or U-Pick or whatever, I think across Washington. And then some other places that I like to, if you're buying, McClendon's Hardware actually has a lot of food preservation. They have a good food preservation section, and depending on your McClendon's, many of them like sell pressure canners. They sell like fermenting crocks. They will always have jars and Ball Blue Book and all that stuff there. And then some online folks. So there's Excalibur. I think Cabela's also sells like really decent, inexpensive Excalibur style food dehydrators. Anyways, okay. Just wanted to show you some of those things. And now I will maybe, I'm happy to answer more questions, but I also feel like I just want to take a quick break so that people can kind of get up and stretch and not look at a computer for a minute. And I think we're going to transition to Amanda's going to show us around the tool library. Does that sound right?
Yeah, we can do that. You want to take like 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, let's take like my clock says 6:45. Let's take 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 6:50. Lisa says Marlene's in Federal Way also has a lot of fermenting supplies. Cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Marlene
Yeah.
is awesome. I was just punching in that Eat Local First, and there's not a lot of options other than the farmers market that are coming up there, but there are some in Auburn and Kent and some really close. We're South King County. Federal Way, we know we spread out all over South King County, so very cool. But good suggestion with Marlene's. Okay, 5 minutes. We'll be back here and I'll show you guys the kind of tools you can check out for free to help you on your next mission.
Do you want to pause the recording during the break?
Oh, that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Okay. See you in 5 minutes. Okay.
Sorry. Go for it.
Okay, so for the recording, welcome back. And the question I was asking was from Sherry from Facebook about how long do you dehydrate things? And for vegetables, they should be so dry that they're brittle and you can crack them. But with fruits, they can they can still be pliable, but they shouldn't be sticky or tacky at all. And and if you like your fruit to be softer and less dehydrated, you can actually, you could do that to your taste, but then you would want to keep it in the refrigerator or the freezer for long-term storage. Okay, so hopefully that helped to answer the question. And you can also, yeah, I think on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, there's like I think there's probably information about how to know when and tips and tricks for like how to know when your stuff is done. Can you over dry? I don't think you can over dry. It's the drier it is, the better it'll store. I think really is for fruit, it's gonna get like, I always try to dry things as dry as I can. And then if I'm going to use it, like later than, like with dried vegetables, like I'm gonna rehydrate that before I use it. So like I'm like dropping it into a soup. So the soup is going to like simmer and yeah, I don't think you can over dry something.
Well, and really
I
thinking
always-
about it too, I wonder if like dehydrating partially and then freezing kind of helps with that issue you were talking about, like freezing, like having it stick together. It might help a little bit more when they're drier, so that they won't stick together.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I do often do a combination of like, for some things I like a softer, like blueberries, I like them to be like half dry. So I'll like half dry them and then I'll pack them into the freezer. It just kind of like, if you can make the overall volume of blueberries shrink, so you have like you use less storage space, but they still like taste good. It's not like too hard chewy thing. I don't know. You can play around with it.
Yeah, blueberries are the one thing that I don't like really dried or freeze dried, because I feel like they just like they don't have much of a flavor.
Yeah.
It's just the like fiber that's left, which okay, I guess that's good for you, but like, when you want to eat something, that's not always desirable. And usually I'm making it into something else. If I'm going to preserve it, I'm going to make it into, part of something else. But and then it's a silly thing, but I love throwing blueberries into the toaster oven, which like, just because I have picky kids, or a bitter batch of blueberries, you get those seasonally, and you just, what are you going to do with them? Like, you can either cook them in with some other berries, or if you throw them in the toaster oven, it kind of ripens them up quickly. And I like to put that with ice cream or something, add a healthy element to it. But yeah,
cool.
Yeah,
that's like, because they taste sweeter once they're cooked, is that yeah, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Sorry,
That's a good tip. I've never thought about doing that. I used to work in a restaurant where we roasted grapes, and I never thought about doing it with blueberries. Sounds delicious.
I think it was an accidental discovery. I was like toasting almonds, and then I like put some blueberries on at the same time, because I don't know why, but oatmeal probably was involved. So
cool.
I'll do anything to try to make oatmeal more palatable, because it just doesn't do it for me.
Maple syrup and butter.
That's not as healthy version of the almonds and toasted blueberries. But anyway, all right, well, I'll show you guys around real quick. Does this look okay? Does it look weird? Do I sound weird? Is it okay?
You sound good. Okay. Yeah, looks good. Right.
Take you guys on a little bit of a trip here. So hi, it's Amanda again. Good to see you guys. Maybe if I hold on, try to do this the smart way. Spotlight. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so welcome. This is the tool library. Ta-da! It's my other child, as I put it, and levels of chaos. But if you haven't been here, I definitely welcome you guys to come down. I know somebody mentioned that they were in Spokane, so they weren't really able to use this as a resource, but there are tool libraries around the world, some opening all the time. I did speak to a gentleman that was starting a tool library in Spokane, so hopefully that's going well. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you guys today about what we have available on your food preservation journey to check out for free. And it includes some of the more intimidating things, some of the more like cost prohibitive things that you might worry about sinking a bunch of money into and wondering if you're going to get the return on your investment. So why not try them out first, see how you like doing the processes, if you think it's just something that is worthwhile your time, or if you just don't do it very often. Because honestly, I mean, how often are we don't usually all have farms, but there was a really great, and I think they're still with us, a really great family that during the pandemic came to us and was excited because they could use some of the things that they had received, 50 pounds of onions. So they dried them. Valencia, I'm looking at you if you're there, but no pressure. It was just really neat because I didn't think of that as a tool to really help be cost effective and save money. But when you get things in large quantities, trying to figure out how to creatively use them. I know when we were getting the school lunches for during the pandemic. My kids were like so sick of apples, so sick of applesauce, and eventually I just started, giving away applesauce and things like that. So getting creative in how we reduce our waste in that way. Let the tool library be in addition to you as you try things out. So Carrie talked about a few different tools that would help you. We have these pressure canners. They're in the tool library's inventory as pressure cookers and pressure canners, because that's technically what they are. We even have a lot of the little helpful supplies. This is a metal version of the funnels that you can use to can with. And we do have a ball canning book available. Now we have this smaller one, and then we have some larger ones as well in our food preservation section, which are really helpful when you have larger jars of things. I know, we don't usually water bath can in pots like this, but I always find it challenging to use the right size pot for my, tomato sauces and stuff. So we do have a little guy available for helping you do some of the water bath canning. And this is just actually a pasta insert for a pot that is, I couldn't tell you how many gallons that is. My brain isn't really working this week, but some smaller ones if you wanted to try those out. And then these are our large, what we kind of call them commercial grade dehydrators. They're super handy, really similar to the one that Carrie showed you in the picture. You can kind of see back here, all the way in the back, they have a big fan that is the heating and circulation unit. And then we do have the trade, home use version of the dehydrators that are really traditional. Usually you can find those, like Carrie said, at the thrift store for not a lot, but they're kind of fun to experiment with and to get, kids more active. These larger ones are great for getting large batches done. Getting, you can kind of see, I don't know how many trays are in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, probably 10 trays. So that's a lot that you can process at one time. The other thing with these dehydrators are, they're kind of heavy. They do take up some time or take up some space. So you might not want to keep these around year round. So these might be something that you want to check out just to process your herbs or something in this after the season's over. Excuse me. And up here we have some of these fancy looking guys. These are actually vacuum sealers that are pretty handy. And we do have a lot of the bags available as well to go with those. So as you're throwing things into the freezer, we adamantly try to reduce plastic use at the tool library, but it is an inevitability. And when it comes to safety and food preservation, it's something that is almost a necessary evil in some of our daily lives. So using that as a tool to make sure that you're using your food to the fullest potential, will allow some of the plastic use. It's okay. And let me think, what else was there? We also have an amazing freeze dryer. Some of the folks on here have been experimenting with it in the past and know that it is a really valuable asset, but it is currently under in triage for the vacuum pump to get totally fixed and replaced at 100% capacity. So we'll have that back in the market, and hopefully really soon we can put you in line for that. It is about, I think, 2 months out right now, booked out. So let us know if you're interested in doing that. I can make sure to put my email address in the chat, and you can email us to figure out what you might like to check out. And thank you, Nikki, for joining us. I see we have some questions, so I'm going to stop sharing. I think that was kind of what we had. Unfortunately, the KitchenAid that's here is not, it's a repair project. The air fryer that's here was a repair project, but it's been here for so long now, it's repaired and might as well just put it into circulation so you guys can check it out too. So I will definitely look at the questions now. I'm going to stop This one? Yeah, that's confusing now. I'm gonna be.
Okay, I will remove your spotlight, Amanda, and I am happy to answer the questions. Lisa asked, I made tomato paste and tomato powder in my oven last year. Could I use one of the dehydrators to do the process as well? And I think that's a great idea. I think I would do the first cook down on the stove or in like a slow cooker until it gets to be like pretty thick, like the thickness of applesauce, and then you could do the last dry in the dehydrator, and you could even like pour it thin and dry it until it like becomes like all the way dried so you could powder it, or even like a fruit roll up and store it that way. You definitely you can do jerky in the dehydrators as well. Again, I would do a little more research, just because with meats, because they're associated with like foodborne pathogens, you do want to have some kind of higher heat kill step at some point. And is there a list of what requires pressure canning versus what can be done in water? That's a great question. And usually the way that I think about that is I look for a recipe. So for the most part, if it's vegetables that are not being pickled, vegetables, meats, beans, fish, those are soup, those are all broth. Those are all going to be low acid foods and need to go in the pressure canner. If it is an acidic or acidified food, like it's a fruit that tastes sweet or that tastes sour, or if you're following a recipe that's specifically meant for water bath canning for like salsa, marinara sauce, those types of things, you're going to want to follow, if you want to water bath can it, you're going to want to follow a recipe that's specific for water bath canning, because with salsa, you're taking like a tomato, which is already kind of a borderline thing, and then you're adding vegetables like onions and jalapenos to it, so you're dropping that acidity down. Those water bath canning recipes will actually be adding a bunch of lime juice or a bunch of vinegar to counteract that. So you want to make sure you are not a food scientist in your home, so that you shouldn't be developing those recipes at home. Find a recipe that's specifically meant for water bath canning if you're going to be doing like an acidified food product, which is like a chutney or a salsa or something like that. So hopefully that answered that question. Cool. And you're welcome also, if you want to ask questions with your voice, if you feel comfortable. I'm going to move my computer here to, hopefully this is, I don't know, can we see here? I was going to do just like kind of a quick, how many folks, maybe by a show of emoji hand, how many folks have done water bath canning before? Okay, I see Amanda, I see Lisa. Sweet. Okay.
I know this is Carrie. I know a couple other people have too, I'm sure, but yeah.
Cool. Okay. They may be in the middle of fixing their supper. So, okay. So so what I have here, I just wanted to show you, like, this is a big canner. They come in different sizes. The one, Amanda, that you were showing was pretty little. I like to use little ones at my house because I'm boiling less water, and my family uses very small amount of canned products, so I do a lot of canning. It's easier to see if I do this in this size jar, which is like a jelly jar or a half pint. And so the one thing about canning that I like to let people know is, like, you don't have to do if the recipe says like a canner load of 7 jars or a canner load of 9 jars, like, you don't have to do like 9 jars of tomatoes, like 9 quarts of tomatoes. Like, you can do like 2 of these in a small canner, and that is whatever is appropriate for like the amount of harvest that you have. If you have like green beans that came out of your garden, great, you can do 2 half pints of pickled green beans, and that is, adjust the recipe. The the volume of the recipe.
You just have to math.
So
That's the scary thing. You have to do
it's
math.
it's a little bit of math, but a lot of the recipes are like you're adding like a garlic clove to each jar. So it's, or like the recipes are written sometimes where you're adding like a certain amount to each jar. So you can count by this amount of jars that you have. And it's the same thing with, canning like fruits and syrup, or canning, green bean pickles, where like you're making an amount of syrup or you're making an amount of brine. But yeah, you're not necessarily, anyways. So one thing that I will say is like, when I say like adjust the recipe, I'm not talking about changing the recipe. Like you want to use the recipe how it's written, but you can make it bigger or smaller. Just adjusting the size of it. You're not adjusting like more or less onions. You're just adjusting like it's math. Yeah, I guess.
Volume, right? But
yeah,
it's not going to change like the cooking time or the really important things. Like you can, the cooking time, processing stuff. Gotcha.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So here's my canner. There's a lid. Usually the canner, these types of grantware canners come with a rack. These racks that they come with tend to be kind of flimsy. I actually, when I'm using this, this is the rack that came with my pressure canner. So I use that as a rack. You can also buy smaller racks, or you can make a rack. Sometimes I have like the smallest size of the Weber grill. Sometimes I use that
I've heard of using tea towels and like, or towels, and you can put them inside. I had to do that one time when I was sterilizing baby bottles, just so it wouldn't stick to the bottom and that. Yeah.
I mean, definitely you want to be able, like water to be able to flow underneath it. But I think that would work in a pinch too. So that's that's kind of it. And then one thing is that like a lot of a lot of cooktops now are glass. And so I would just double check with your oven's manufacturer to see if it's okay to do like pressure canning. Sometimes I worry about because it's a long, also like if you're doing a big canner like this, where the circumference of the pot is bigger than the circumference of the heating element, you just want to kind of be wary of that. I sometimes use like a portable butane to do my canning if it's because I'm a little unsure about my glass top that I work with, that I have at home. I also, we're going to be using, these are Mason style jars, and then they come with a 2-piece lid. In the United States, this is the lid that is most common and recommended. Comes in 2 sizes. So there's like the wide mouth and the regular mouth. And this is like a half pint. This is a pint. This is a quart. So they come in lots of sizes. Knowing the volume of your jar size is helpful because the processing time might be different. If you're doing like a pint of green beans, it might be different than the processing time might be different than if it's a quart. And then also these are both pints, but one's a wide and one's a twice. So let's see, I don't know if you can see, this is like, normally I would, my first step is I would put my canner on and I'm going to fill it half or even a little bit more with water. And I'm going to start that to boil. I want to preheat the water in my canner. You want to have enough water in there so that when you put all your jars in, the water level is going to be above the jars at least an inch. So you want to start with a good amount of water in there. Especially if you're just doing a couple jars, you want maybe to be almost full. And then oftentimes I will preheat my jars in my canner. So put them in there like that, and just kind of get my water started. If the processing time of your recipe is less than 10 minutes, you want to sterilize your jars. But if your processing time is 10 minutes or more, you don't need to, they just need to be hot and clean. That makes any sense.
I did not know that's like the game changer for me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you don't have to sterilize if you're processing 10 minutes or more. And I think that is a cool thing to know because like when I make jam, sometimes the jams will always be like process 5 minutes. And I just always process 10 minutes because I don't want to sterilize my jars. I'm lazy. But it's like that extra 5 minutes of processing is not going to do the jam any harm. If that makes any sense. You always do something more. You just can't do it less. That's the key with canning is that for safety, you can always process more. You just don't want to process less. So in this imaginary world where I am, my canner is filled with water. I'm using a jar lifter. I'm pulling it out of the hot water. And I might have several of these. I would do like pull all the jars out at once. Let's see, I have some blueberries. So these are fun tools that are very helpful. Jar lifter. You can't get a hot jar out of boiling water without one of these. Don't use your fingers. And then a jar funnel. This is, it's like a regular funnel, but it's got a wide mouth so you can get it in a jar.
Don't use tongs either. I made that mistake again with baby bottles and trying to use tongs, and that's a great
It's very
way to pour
dangerous.
boiling water all over everything.
It's very dangerous. Don't do it. Yeah. So if I was canning blueberries, so I've got blueberries here washed. I'm going to, this is the size I like. You might use that size. You might use the size. Sorry about the lighting being weird. So I'm going to fill up, and I want to fill just so that there's something called headspace. You want to make sure that there's enough space between the food and the top of the jar. So I'm not going to fill it too like all the way up to the top. I want there to be a little space, and then I'm going to take my syrup. So this is hot syrup that I made, and you can look at the UGA website for like how to can berries and syrup, and then you can do different kinds of syrup. You can do a heavy syrup, you can do a medium syrup, you can do a light syrup, you can even do it in juice. And there will be a link there for you to get to a place where it tells you how to make your syrup. And it really is just like how much sugar to how much water would be different. And then ladling in there, again, you're looking at that headspace. I'm going to pull this out and see that I put a little too much syrup in there. So the first thing, usually if you're doing hot syrup or you're making pickles and you get cold food and hot liquid over, you might get some bubbles, air bubbles clinging to that food. So I'm going to use like a chopstick or something, not metal. And then I'm looking for like 1/4 inch of headspace, so 1/4 inch between the top of my food and the top of my jar. So I've got a little extra there. I'm gonna leave a little space. Might take so I'm gonna fill all my jars, and then I'm gonna wipe, especially if you're making jam, like you don't want anything on this. This is your sealing surface. You want to make sure that that's clean. I take my lids, which are new. Amanda said this earlier, but this is the only part, like this jar is reusable. These rings are reusable, but the insert for the lid, the sealing compound is guaranteed just to seal once. So each time you want to use a new lid. Wash them, put the lid on. You're going to screw the band on. Remember, this jar is hot. Screw the band on, and you're going to heighten it just like so that it's closed, but you're not like cranking it all the way tight. Just, they say finger tight. So you're just gonna close it with your fingers and then fill all the jars, lid all the jars. Sometimes I like to have like a cookie sheet with a towel on it. And then I'll pick this up and then I'll move it to my thing. I'm gonna put all my jars in, make sure they're steady. I'm going to put, there should be 1 inch of water above the jars. I'm going to put the lid on and I'm going to crank the heat up so that it comes to a full rolling boil. And that's like this. And once the lid is on, it comes to a full rolling boil, then I set my timer for whatever that processing time is. When the timer goes off, ding, I'm going to turn off my heat. I'm going to very carefully take off the lid It's gonna be very steamy. I'm gonna put that in a place. And I'm just gonna let it chill out for 5 minutes because there's probably like food product bubbling and boiling in there. I'm just gonna like let it just sit for 5 minutes. And then I'll pull this out. There's gonna be some water sitting on the top here. You might be tempted to tip it sideways. Don't do that because that seal maybe hasn't sealed yet. So just keep it upright and then move it over. Pull them all out and just let them sit there for 12 to 24 hours. Let them cool down. You'll hear it seal, boom. And then after they've completely cooled and the seal is like cured after 12 to 24 hours, then what I'll do is I'll take the ring off, clean if there's anything goo, label the tops, and then store without the rings. And so that is a very quick version of my process. I'm going to see Linda says I've canned before, but I put the lids in with a seal in hot water bath and on the stove so they're hot when I jar up the product like jam. And that was how I was taught. Is that not needed? So that is a good question. And that is also how I was taught. But I have recently, one of those updates, and how I said before that they're continually like renewing and changing recommendations. I think that the modern lids, that rubber gasket is poured so thin that if you were to boil, like you can pre-warm them if you want, but it's not necessary. And you don't need, like, if you were to boil these for 10 minutes, like you were sterilizing your jars, that lid might get too soft actually and squeeze out when you do your sealing. So I was told in a more recent recommendation that is no longer recommended to do that. Really, it's like follow the manufacturer's instructions. And the lid manufacturer instructions no longer say to pre-warm them. It just says lids are for one-time use only. Wash lids in hot soapy water, rinse well, set aside until ready for use.
Now, Carrie, I have some of you might know this about me, but my grandparents were Amish and Mennonite, and so we would go to visit farms when I was a kid, and some things I remember, some things I don't, thank goodness. But there was definitely the wax. They used wax sealing in some of their canned goods, and
Yeah.
I just don't know, like, I think it kind of goes in line with this question too, because obviously the chemistry of things has changed and we know more about safety and stuff. And I know wax breathes, so that probably isn't a good thing. But do you have any experience or know about that kind of thing?
Yeah, my grandmother also used to pour wax when she made jam. Like, cause you just like, you boil the jars, you pour the jam, and then you pour a layer of wax. And I think when I was trained, when I was trained to do canning, I said that I've learned that like it's no longer recommended because this whole thing doesn't go into the water and do the water bath process. And I think that because there's also a what they call open kettle method, where you basically sterilize your jars, you put hot jam in there, you lid it, and then you turn it upside down and let it. And that they do that in UK. I think it's still considered a recommendation. I think that if your jars are sterilized, your lid. So we're not sterilizing the lid anymore because we're not boiling it in hot water. So that, I guess if you're doing wax, the lid is not part of the issue because it's the wax. But it will probably be okay with jam. I know anecdotally that like 1 out of 10 of my grandmother's jams always like the seal broke and it got moldy. So this is a little bit more like guaranteed, I think, to go through this water bath process. I think there also was a fear of like paraffin on the stove can very easily cause a fire.
Right.
So that's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's like you wouldn't do that with something with like I wouldn't do that with a syrup product because basically you're putting fresh food. Yeah.
It would just become it's interesting. It's just how it has evolved and changed and how things, but they also used to just anything that would have a compromised seal. That's a pig food.
Mhm.
That was their compost for things. So it's easier to, you know, have that whole cycle take its process. You don't feel like it's wasted, even if it's not 100% all of the time. So, yeah, Lisa, I think that answered your question too. I had a
The
question.
lids. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had a question too about like cold, you know, things that have gotten cold from cooking. I know I think I've heard the answer to this, but I can't remember what it was. But things that you've like let cool down and then maybe you want to try to can it again. Do you, or can it, maybe you're canning it again. Maybe it's like pasta sauce or soup or something like that. Should you heat it back up? How should that work? Should you just always need to heat it up so that it's hot in order to go in the hot water bath can? Is that for just like the temperature difference so you don't break the glass kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, so there are terms that are related to that. There's one thing called a raw pack and there's one thing called a hot pack. And so if you look at a recipe, like with blueberries, there's a raw pack would be fresh blueberries in assumed a hot jar with hot syrup over it. So basically the jar is warm and there may be going into the canner and there may be certain processing time for a raw pack. And then the hot pack might be you're like simmering or poaching the berries ahead of time so that the like the berries and the syrup are both going into the jar hot. And as you can imagine, that temperature of the food product going into the jar is different. So the processing time, it's going to take less time for the heat to penetrate all the way through to the center. So you wouldn't, like for jam, as an example, you make the jam, you pour it into the jar hot, you process, it's a hot pack, you process it at that certain amount of time. But like if you were to let your jam cool down all the way and then put it in a jar, it would take so much longer to heat that jam all the way through to the center than what your processing time had accounted for, if that makes any sense. So you're changing the recipe by changing the temperature of jam that's going into the jar. And I think it's the same thing with like, if you're doing tomatoes, if you did a hot pack, which means it's like a hot tomato sauce or puree, the processing time is going to be shorter than if you were doing a raw pack, which is like basically just like cramming tomatoes in the jar cold. That process is going to take much longer because you have to heat all of that product all the way through. And I don't know if folks are interested in looking like at how a recipe is written, I can pull up a recipe. Let's see. Are people interested in that? We just have a few more minutes. So I don't know if folks are interested in looking at, we can look at the pressure canner or we can see how a recipe is written. So that if folks are unclear when I say like processing time or raw pack, hot pack.
Let's look at the pressure canner just because I'm sure that,
okay.
Intimidating.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
And I just remembered what it was. I was pickling watermelon rind and that's what it was. It got cold and then I was like, oh crap, I gotta redo this.
Yeah. So you want to make sure your brine is hot. The recipe that you're using probably is accounting for the fact that like the brine is hot, the syrup is hot, the jam is hot. This is pressure canner. This is, I think, the same All-American that you have at the tool library. There's other kinds. There's lots of different kinds and different brands. I think Presto. With other brands besides the All-American, what you're going to see is like a rubber gasket that's sealing the lid to the bottom. The All-American doesn't have that. Instead, it's got this sort of like beveled piece and you're supposed to run a little bit of oil along the inside. It also, the difference with this All-American is that it has a dial gauge and a rocker gauge. And so that's, I think that's really convenient because the one thing, if you have a pressure canner with a dial gauge, you need to have that gauge checked every year for accuracy. And if it's not accurate, I think if it's like 1 PSI off, it's okay to use, but if it's 2 or more, you have to get a new dial. Because the thing about this is like, we just want to be sure that we're absolutely sure we know what's happening, that we can read the exact right PSI for what's going on in here, because that's going to ensure our safety. Like, we don't want to be messing around with botulism. We don't want to like go through all of this process of pressure canning something and then not feel safe that what we did is like, you know, even that little bit of doubt is going to make you feel unsafe about the food that you eat. So the process for pressure canning is a little bit longer. And so, you know, you put your jars in, and then you have to kind of bring it up to, there's like a little vent port, and you're going to like see steam coming out. You have to vent it for a full 10 minutes. There's like several steps that are kind of not necessarily intuitive. And so if you have a pressure canner, if you're borrowing a pressure canner from Tool Library, I would get the instructions. If you don't have the instructions, there should be like on the UGA website, there's like how to pressure can, like read the entire article all the way through and then practice. And I would practice actually bringing up to temperature, venting, doing pressure, letting it go to pressure, and then it has to hold at that pressure for as long as your processing time is, because if it dips below, it doesn't count, and you have to start your timing all over. So it's like, if you've ever done, if you haven't done pressure canning before, I would suggest that you, like with the device, take it home, read all the instructions, and then practice before you even put food product in there, because you want to know, you want to have that little bit muscle memory of like, okay, I did this and then this and then this, because it is a process and you do want to make sure that you're doing correctly. And so the way that this works is you kind of have it sitting in there. Other pressure canners will have a rubber gasket, and then these ones are a little different. You put these like things in and then you twist them. I'm gonna do one on each side.
All of ours have the instructions, and I was just noting they haven't been checked out more than once or twice. So, but I'll put down that we'll do a dial testing, and I think we can do it with just what we have as far as air compressors and stuff here. So that should be pretty easy. Maybe if I can figure it out, we can offer that to folks too. So.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a helpful thing, I think, with the All-American, because it has the rocker gauge. Like, I would go by this, and how the rocker gauge works is it's like at 10 psi, and then when it gets to that, it lifts it up, and off gas is a little bit of steam. So if it goes pss, 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 and if so, you're counting for like a certain amount of those per minute to know that it's at 10 psi. But there's a little bit of, it's sort of a tricky thing where like once you get it up to pressure, then you can start to lower the heat. Like, you don't want the pressure to continue rising, so you want to like lower the heat a little bit, but you don't want it to go below pressure. So there's a little bit of practice, and I definitely, if you want to do pressure canning, I would learn. It's a skill that you have to learn and practice. Like, learn it, practice it, and then put your like 10 pounds of ahi tuna or like whatever is going on in the, you know, like even if it's like, and I think once you know how to use this tool, it can be really handy. Like, you can pre-make soups, you can can whole chickens, like you can broth and like put up a bunch of broth and have it room temperature. Like, thank you. Yeah, Lisa. McClendon's does do testing. That's the only place that I know that reliably will do dial testing. But I also can't call them before you go in, because I think there's like, you have to have the person that knows how to do it. Make sure that they're at work that day. So the pressure canner is intimidating if you've never used one, and really it's just like, it's not hard to do. I would just recommend like making sure that you understand the process in your mind and practicing it, bringing up to pressure, venting, all of that stuff, and then coming down from pressure. and just practicing that once or twice so you feel comfortable with the mechanics, so that once your food is in there, you're like, oh, what am I doing next? Because I think that thing of like heat, like lowering and like fiddling with the heat, because ultimately to hold it at pressure, it's not going to take a lot of heat, but you don't want it to dip below your like 11 psi or whatever is required at any time during your processing time.
I know it was intimidating to me because I always thought of explosions and things, and that it takes a lot for that to happen now that I understand.
Yeah. I mean, they're designed for it to not happen. The only way that would happen is like if this the port, it gets clogged, so make sure that it's not clogged. And the first thing they'll have, there's a like emergency valve, so if the pressure builds up, it'll pop that. There's like a little plastic rubber emergency thing, so if it builds up too much pressure, it'll just pop it out. I don't, yeah,
even the
I mean, it's not like
ones have stuff like that too, the Instant Pots and things. They have a lot of kind of fail safe stuff so that doesn't happen. So just to, if anybody was worried like I was initially about pressure canners. Lisa asked a question about what you used, because instead of using like the glass top, what do you recommend to do that with, especially to pressure can with, have that controllable, consistent, I mean, I know gas is definitely the most manipulable and controllable, but what do you recommend?
It's a good question. I haven't done a lot of pressure canning recently since I got this glass top stove. I have, it was like in my old place, I had like the old electric, burner, what do you call that? The burner.
Yeah, it's a burner.
Yeah. They don't make those anymore.
I know.
If you have a glass stove, I mean, if you have a gas stove, that can be helpful. This like is a tabletop burner, and this is just I don't know if you can see it, but it's like it uses, the fuel that uses are these like little butane cans. It's not ideal because they're like one-time use cans, but they're relatively inexpensive. My only concern is that I would be leery of like if you're canning something has a very long, like if you're doing like fish and it's like 120 minutes or something is your processing time, I would be nervous that the can would run out of fuel in the middle of processing time, which would make me nervous. But for a short processing, for a shorter, like if you're doing tomatoes, I've done pressure canning tomatoes on this. I would use it for water bath canning.
Yeah, and is there anything, I mean, so I just, for my first time in my adult life, got a glass top stove and oven, and I always used cast irons. And apparently that is a big no-no. I immediately scratched the surface because you don't clean the cast irons like you clean other pots and pans. So
yeah.
Lisa mentioned a flat bottom, and then she has another question about crab cooking stove for outside the hooks.
Yeah, the big propane.
Yeah,
those, I know you're talking about, like the big dudes that have like a lot of BTUs.
Yeah.
I would try it out. I think the thing that I would be nervous about is being able to get the flame low enough, because once you're up to pressure, it's not a high flame that you're on. It's a pretty low flame. Just to maintain, you're just maintaining pressure.
Maybe
I would try it out. Try it out. If you already have those things, try it out before you put food product in. Practice first. And I think the same with the glass top stoves. When I was trained to teach about canning, the glass top stove was not really a thing. It's very rare, and so it was recommended to not can on a glass top stove. But now that like everybody has a glass top stove, they don't make other kinds unless you have gas at your house. And I think my new recommendation is check with the manufacturer, because it can't possibly be that like no one is allowed to can in their house anymore because everyone has a glass top stove. Like that doesn't sound right to me. So there's got to be like different maybe levels of kinds of glass top stoves. I think also maybe as long as you're not, like with water bath canning, as long as you're not processing for like a really, really long time where like the glass might overheat, or that your canner is not like, 2 inches or more wider than the area of the burner is, I think it probably should be okay. I think the thing that is sometimes of concern is like these old granite ones, and this may be what Lisa's talking about, the flat bottom pot, but because there's like,
Dimples
it's
something, or like,
it's not completely flat all the way through. I think that there's like that, as like the air, there might be some suction that happens. Anyways, yeah, okay, that's a thumbs up from Lisa. Okay, so I think that is maybe what part of those recommendations are. So if you have flat bottom, is going to be better for that. If you have an induction burner, you probably want to make sure that like whatever stock pot you're using for your canner works with the induction. Because I don't know about the like those graniteware canners, if they work with an induction burner. Yeah, there are more questions for me to find out about this glass top thing. I wish I knew more.
I wish I didn't, well, I wish I knew before, because I love cooking with cast iron, and so I'm really upset that now I can't do that hardly at all.
You
But
can't, so you can't use it at all?
I guess I can use the you can use the porcelain coated, what is that?
Oh yeah,
Ware or
yeah.
really nice stuff. But yeah, most of what I have several things. But what about, I mean, so propane kind of stoves would be okay to use?
Yeah, I think as long as, I mean, my only concern is I wouldn't want to run out of gas and have to change the gas can in the middle of my process.
Right.
That's the only thing that I get nervous about with like a really long process, to know how long that can of gas is going to last. I just realized it's 7:40 already, and I know I want to let people go and have the rest of their evening. But I also, there's lots of resources I gave you. You're also, like, I feel like I also want to continue to be available to answer questions too. I don't like check Facebook or anything, so I don't know if I'd be able to keep an eye on the Facebook about this, but if you're welcome to like get in touch with me through Amanda. I'm happy to continue answering questions.
Yeah, well, I copied you on the email that I sent to everybody that's registered for the class, and if they're here,
Cool.
registered. If
Cool.
you didn't get the email, let me know. And I sent, I put in the chat earlier the attachment that you sent, and I can send it
Cool.
again. And we are recording this, so we'll be able to put it up on our YouTube. But with that, I'm going to stop recording and just say thank you, Carrie. Thank you for all of your knowledge and patience and wisdom. And thank you guys for all of your time and questions and for joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and stop.